Elizabeth Street. It's the main street of Hobart. The city grew up along Elizabeth Street and it's been home to many iconic Tasmanian businesses, including Beattie Studio. G'day and welcome to Forgotten Tasmania. I'm John Stevenson. I'm excited to be back in the city and on Elizabeth Street, taking a history walk from Morrison to Bathurst streets. There's some amazing things to show you. I'll be guided by the old photos and I'm off to find out how many of the old buildings are left and how many have been lost. White settlement only dates back 216 years, but lest we forget that the First Nation people were here for at least 60,000 years before that. I don't feel qualified to provide an accurate history on their behalf, but I do want to acknowledge the Muhunina people. In 1804, Lieutenant Colonel David Collins led a party which formed a camp on the banks of the River Derwent. The British were concerned the French would take this land at the beginning of the Napoleonic War. In the previous year, Lieutenant John Bowen founded an unsuccessful settlement further up the river at Risdon Cove. Even Collins' arrival at Sullivan's Cove wasn't the first choice by authorities in New South Wales. The first stop was Port Phillip Bay, but dissatisfied with the conditions there, Collins ordered the expedition to continue south. Funnily enough, it would be a team from Van Diemen's Land who later went back and established Melbourne. More on them later. Hobart Town grew from the harbour at Sullivan's Cove, up the hill and into what's now the main CBD. Eight years later, Collins' planning skills didn't impress Governor Macquarie during his visit. He promptly planned streets named after himself and his wife, citing Government House where Macquarie meets Elizabeth, and there's got to be some innuendo there. The British shipped their convicts here, and Hobart Town was a prison destination. So the landscape was quite different back in the early 1800s. This is mostly reclaimed land. In fact, the old waterline is about here somewhere. Up on this hill was the square, consisting of Government House and official buildings, a barracks and courthouse. Government House looked down over the water so they could see the ships arriving. It was moved to the Domain in 1857. The government precincts scattered over the years, especially in the 1970s when brutalist architecture took over and brown brick towers replaced sandstone buildings. In more recent times, the government buildings have regrouped around Parliament House with the Salamanca Square project. It seems the state government has returned to the waterfront. And Davey Street stopped here at Murray Street. There was a lot of change throughout this area. They cut some land off the square to extend Davey Street. There was a hotel on Morrison Street called the Florence Nightingale. It extended out too far into the middle of what's now Elizabeth Street. It was built in 1856, suffered a major fire in 1870 and was demolished in 1875 to be replaced by the Franklin Hotel, probably named after Governor John Franklin.
Yeah, that's the corner of Elizabeth and Morrison. That's Holliman's building. Now the Franklin Hotel was built more or less because when they extended Elizabeth Street right through to Morrison Street so that they had access to the wharf, right in the middle of there was another hotel which was very popular called the Florence Nightingale. So when they demolished it, they built the Franklin Hotel in place of it.
The Mariners' Church was on the waterfront. This was a non-denominational church building that could hold about 200 people. Collins says there might have been some rivalry with St David's and another church in Campbell Street, and this one fell out of favour. It was dismantled brick by brick and moved to the corner of Lord and Grosvenor Streets in Sandy Bay. My godson was christened there. The Hobart Motor Company was built next to the Franklin Hotel by Charles Ernest Webster, part of the family behind Webster's Limited, founded by Alexander Webster in 1831 and still going today. In 1913, the Hobart Motor Company moved to Collins Street to become Cooperative Motors. One car company moved out and another moved in. Isaac Robert Nettlefold was born in 1877 at Tunnock in the Central Highlands. He worked as a general merchant in Macquarie Street. He combined selling fire insurance to farmers with dealing in their wool, skins and produce, later selling them farm machinery through his franchise with International Harvester Company. In 1910 he founded the motor garage business Robert Nettlefold Proprietary Limited, and in 1913 the company moved from Murray Street to this building in Elizabeth Street. Nettlefold was chairman of the Hume Pipe Company, a director of Mercantile Mutual Insurance, chairman of the Lady Clark Red Cross Convalescent Home, member of the Hobart Rotary Club, committee member of the Royal Agricultural Society, chairman of Yellow Cabs Tasmania, and one of the founders of Commercial Broadcasters. He was appointed OBE for his wartime Red Cross activities. There were yellow cabs operating as part of Nettlefold's company, and that's how we get to this Beattie photo from about 1920. Nettlefolds later evolved into motors. The buildings just to the right of the hotel were about where the Marine Board building is now. The tall red tower is built on reclaimed land, which was once water, hence it's Marine Board land and allegedly wasn't subject to council planning laws, which is why it was built, or so the rumour goes. Renowned conservationist Bob Brown, who had an office in the building, wanted it torn down at one point, but it's still there, although there were wind turbines on the roof at one point and they appear to have vanished. The Peace building on the corner is still there, but Nettlefolds and the Franklin Hotel buildings are long gone, providing fuel for Collins' book. On the other side of the road there was the Bruni and Sydney Coal Company, and then the Risby Timber Mill, which burned down, and then later the Hydro building would be built there, and next door the Council Service Centre occupies the space with Service Tasmania.
That's the Bruni and Sydney Coal Company, firewood there. But later on they got short-shifted and you got Risby's. That's Risby's mill right through there. In 1922 they had a very bad fire, got completely burnt out. It was completely burnt out. Risby's didn't decide not to rebuild there, and it's laid fallow They just cleaned it off, and it just sat there for a while until about 1934 the Hydro decided to buy it. And they built their new building.
I've covered Franklin Square in a previous episode, but three significant things were left unsaid. Firstly, there were air raid shelters dug into Franklin Square during World War II. There were underground public toilets in the middle of Elizabeth Street, and they're still there, hidden under the road.
They're still there.
But they filled them in with gravel.
All they did was jackhammered all this off. And then they were filled up with gravel, so that they made sure that the gravel went into everything. And then they got a layer of top about that thick on top of it.
And thirdly, the wrought iron fence around Franklin Square. I've heard it was used as scrap metal, or sold to the Japanese, or maybe donated to the Lady Clark Hospital in Claremont. All of these are good theories, but the winner is sent to Britain to be recycled as nuts and bolts for the war effort in August of 1944, which seems a shame given the war was nearly over and this beautiful wrought iron fence. But I suppose the spikes wouldn't pass OH&S laws today. This is the intersection of Liverpool and Elizabeth Streets. It was known for many years as Economy Corner. That came about because it was an empty paddock until 1842, and country people sold their produce in a sort of farmer's market. The building was built in 1842, but had to be rebuilt in 1862 because of problems with the foundations. It housed Salliers around that time and the YMCA around 1908. It became the Economy Corner Shopping Centre in 1918 and then the Hobart Savings Bank in 1926. Next to the old bank is TJ Kane, another long-time Hobart business. They started around 1915. I found a newspaper article announcing their new warehouse saloon at 99 Elizabeth Street and mentions of Bathurst and Market Streets. I wonder if Market Street was named after the sellers at Economy Corner. TJ Kane were ironmongers and hardware merchants. Next to that was the site for A. Cumming and Sons. We see them established in 1829 further up Elizabeth Street. Indeed, Cox Brothers, Best & Co and TJ Kane were all further up Elizabeth Street. Angus Cumming and his sons took over the drapers or clothing store of their cousins, J and W Robertson. Cumming and Robertson must have been real estate developers in the early days of Hobart Town. They were part of a syndicate that sponsored John Batman to go to Victoria and found Melbourne, which was initially called Batmania. Oh, the popular culture references we could make out of that one. So, in some small way, Melbourne's massive shopping empire was founded by Tasmanians. Cumming's major tenant was Findlay's. Judging by the windows and signs, they sold pianos, music, radios and electrical goods. Commercial broadcasters 7HO were in the top of the building from 1930. 8 years later, 7HT started broadcasting from the McCann's building just up the road. The site was later the tourism building, and then part of Treasury was in there. I did quite a few IT repairs for them in my day. The state sold the building and Lillian Ron's friend bought it and turned it into the city apartments, adding another story. And that's one of the reasons I'm researching this area. I ended up doing several murals for the hotel. Talking of shops, Cumming built a large department store on the southwest corner of Elizabeth and Bathurst streets. Designed along the most modern lines, these premises were constructed for Cox Brothers in 1938 and were heralded as an outstanding addition to Hobart's shopping facilities. You can see the AC Cummings & Son logo on the building in these photos from Colin's collection. The plate glass windows at street level were made as large as possible so that full-size figures could be displayed. Horizontal lines were emphasised on the building's facades, and the name of the firm was displayed in large polished steel letters. The building was illuminated at night by powerful lights mounted on top of the awning, and there was a large green neon sign at the top of the tower, which made it an unmistakable landmark. The department store was replaced by a 7-storey hotel in the 1970s. The hotel was recently acquired by the University of Tasmania and adapted to provide student accommodation. I want to back up a few metres and show you number 771, the man on the bike as we call it. So I think this is the spot where Beattie took that amazing photo in about 1916, looking back through to what's now Elizabeth Mall. And yeah, you have to be in the middle of the road to recreate it, but it's probably more of a problem now for me in my day and age than it was for Beattie back then, because horse and cart doesn't go quite as fast. This is one of the most iconic images in the Beattie collection, taken close to the location of Beattie's studio in Elizabeth Street, about 1 p.m. in the afternoon on what must have been a typical working day around 1916. When I recreated this photo in 2016, I wanted a bike in the shot, so I waited for the appropriate time. I was so busy looking through the camera that I failed to notice a bike being ridden just in the right spot. I totally missed the shutter. I'll have to try again in another 100 years. In the centre of the photo is J. Walsh & Sons, a renowned stationers. This building has since been replaced with the National Bank. And this is Wellington Bridge, which was a bridge across the Hobart Town rivulet and a popular stopping spot for boats, and more importantly the original home of Beattie's studio, which was just over there. In 1836, Samuel Tegg opened a branch of his father's London bookshop in Hobart at Wellington Bridge, on the corner of Liverpool and Elizabeth Streets. In 1846, the Walsh family bought the business. By 1876, growth warranted rebuilding this shop, erecting a new building in Macquarie Street and buying a store in Davey Street. Books, stationery, pianos and other musical instruments, sporting goods and paper were sold. The company manufactured stationery items and published books, notably its annual Walsh's Almanac, 1863 to 1970, and Walsh's Literary Intelligentsia, 1859 to 1916. It had a London office and imported directly from the manufacturers. In 1900, a new printing department and manufactory were built. Although the company, remaining in family hands, continued to prosper through most of the 20th century, by 1990 it could not compete with the large multinational enterprises. The printing department had already, in 1969, merged with Mercury Press to form Mercury Walsh. The stationery business was sold and the remainder went into voluntary liquidation in 2003. The next corner of that same intersection was, until recently, the home of the Commonwealth Bank. But that hasn't always been there either. In the Beattie photo we see the Boot Palace, General Store and Chemist. In 1949, construction of the current concrete building commenced. They dug down within 6 inches of sea level to hide the bank's vault deep underground. Cement was imported from England due to a shortage locally. Workers and craftsmen were also brought from far and wide to ensure the first of Hobart's tall buildings would be as grand as possible. Granite was sourced from the Hazards at Coles Bay, and at the time the building cost over £1 million. City architect Mr Deschanel said this would set the standard for the city of Hobart, and sure enough we got lots of tall buildings after this one broke the ceiling, so to speak. The Commonwealth Bank had been housed previously next to the GPO, further down Elizabeth Street. But in September of 1954, the public gathered in awe as CommBank Governor Nugget Coombs pressed a button and 2 large metal doors slowly opened. No one noticed the bank employee cranking the manual handle behind the curtain. The building is now owned by Sultan Holdings, and the Commonwealth Bank retail section has moved out, although they still have some business banking on the upper floors. And by a curious coincidence, Sultan is now the one doing some of these new high-rise buildings in Hobart. I'm with Colin Dennison on this one. I think we need to preserve as many of our heritage buildings as we can, even if only the facades survive. And I wouldn't want to demolish any more, but there's a definite history of this going on, dating back to 1804. That leaves me one last corner of this intersection, the jewellers, Golding and Son. The business was started in the 1830s by Mr David Barclay. He employed William H Golding, who purchased the business and moved it to this corner in the late 1870s. It's been known as Golding's Corner ever since. Golding was succeeded by his sons Arthur and William, but the business is now owned by Mr. Pearce, according to their website. The original building was subdivided and today houses other businesses, but Goldings remains and claims to be the oldest Australian jewellers. I love the building, the ornate figurework, it's easy to spot in photos and it helps me identify the locations. This is an original slab of glass that was here over 100 years ago and captured this image. This is the first photo I tried to digitise and so the one that started it all for me. It's a fitting place to finish this season. Tasmania is an awesome place. Beattie thought that 100 years ago and I think it now. When I inherited the Beattie Studio photographic collection, I had no idea what I'd find in there, and it just keeps on giving. I'll keep on making documentaries about the photos. This show has evolved quite a bit in the last 18 months, and I'm certain it'll evolve even further. For now, this marks the end of Season 2, and I'm already working on Season 3. I can't wait to show it to you, but you will have to wait until February 2021. Thank you for coming on this journey with me and everything you do for me. We are Tasmanian, these are our stories. This is Forgotten Tasmania. Cheers.